Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And today I want to tell you about some fantastic but twisted hidden gem movies you've probably missed on Prime Video. So this is going to be a list of 10 movies you have probably missed. These are hidden gems, but they're all twisted to varying degrees, which are some of my favorite movies. This video is sponsored by Universal Yums. I'll tell you more about their great products later in the video, but let's go ahead and start all the way at the back of this list with my number 10 pick, which features sex robots and an apocalyptic wasteland. Released in 1987, Cherry 2000 is almost like a live-action episode of Rick and Morty. This takes place in the future where companionship has been synthesized. People are no longer coupling up, they're just pairing up with sex robots and paying for sex and transactions, things like that. It's very weird, but it sets it up pretty okay in the beginning. But the hero of this story manages to fry his robot by trying to have sex while doing dishes or something. Weird enough, but he's got to replace this model. They don't make it anymore. He has to get another Cherry 2000, and to do so, he has to venture out into the wasteland. And for some reason, he takes this real live woman with him who's going to be his guide and help him brave the wilds of the apocalypse. She's actually played by Melanie Griffith, and the story goes where you would expect it to go for the most part, but this does have elements of Mad Max, sort of a lower rent, not nearly as good Mad Max. This is for people who like the idea of it and want to watch kind of a silly sci-fi movie from the 80s. If that's not you, I got plenty of other stuff to pick from on this list. My number 9 pick is one of the eeriest documentaries I've ever seen. It's called The Imposter. Now, this is really well made. It's very compelling the way it was shot. They use archival footage, but also some reenactment stuff that's very sort of spooky. And this is about someone who pretended to be someone else in order to get into the country. But the weird thing is, they went and lived with a family that they were supposedly from and deceived blood relatives for a very, very long time. So not only is this eerie and sort of spooky, sort of perfect for this time of year, it's also very, very interesting. And I just love the way that this one was delivered. This was so different back when I saw it years ago when it first came out, and it still holds up today. It's a really cool documentary that's not necessarily alerting you to like major issues in the world, but still this sort of interesting thing that people used to be able to do before the internet. This particular case is one of the more extreme cases though of someone impersonating someone else for years. Permanent Midnight does have a little bit of a following, but I know a lot of you probably still have never seen or heard of this movie starring Ben Stiller and Elizabeth Hurley. Now, this is not a comedy, although it does have some funny elements to it. This is actually about the true story of a sitcom writer who was addicted to heroin. So Ben Stiller plays this role as a heroin addict who's very successful. This is a guy who wrote for Alf, which was a huge hit in the 80s. And while Alf isn't in the movie, there's this other little alien character. Some of the hallucinations he sees when he's going through withdrawals are this little purple alien that clearly is supposed to represent Alf. So it's got this weird quirkiness to it, but it also is a very real portrait of somebody struggling with heroin, and not in the way that you normally see in film. Not sort of in a train spotting sort of way where people are just wasting away in an abandoned building. This guy was making millions of dollars and it was just fueling his addiction. And that's a very real thing too. And Permanent Midnight managed to capture it really, really well. Ben Stiller gives an amazing performance. It's one of his earliest dramatic performances, and I think he killed it. Owen Wilson's got a really great small role here as well. So if you've never seen it and you're a fan of the people involved, this is a very, very interesting project. Now, one that was featured recently on my horror movie list, I'll put a link to that in the description, was Beyond the Black Rainbow. Now, this is from the same director, Panos Cosmatos, I believe is how you say it. He directed Mandy with Nicolas Cage. Now, if you liked Mandy, you definitely need to see Beyond the Black Rainbow because he wrote and filmed them sort of together. He kind of considers them to be an inhale and exhale, and by that, they go together, but they're very, very different in a lot of ways, in the pacing and the look and the feel, but they're clearly from the same mind. Now, this is an art film. This is not a recommendation for everybody. This is very, very bizarre. It's got a pace to it unlike anything that you've seen, and it doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but to me, this feels like it's inspired by Stanley Kubrick. It's super spooky. It's got psychedelic elements, so anyone interested in that topic should definitely check this out, but it is grim, it's dark, it's a good sort of Halloween watch. Don't watch this one if you don't want to be put into a weird mood, but if you're interested in the way that I'm talking about this one, this is a cool flick. It's just very, very unusual. And then we'll round out my bottom 5 on this list with a very unknown movie that I just watched on a whim and loved, called Spell. Now, there are several movies by this title. This one was released in 2018, and it's about a man sort of going on a journey after his fiance dies, and he's trying to sort of not just discover himself, but deal with the trauma of the event. But he sort of goes on this journey of like Nordic mythology and has trouble deciphering what's real and what's not. And while it's an extremely slow burn, I found it to be interesting all the way throughout. It almost lost me a couple of times, but it really sort of kept me engaged. This one is dark, but I would not call it a horror movie. This is just sort of a mystery that's got some heavy, heavy psychological elements. I think anyone that maybe struggles with anxiety or any sort of, I don't want to say mental disorders, but mental health, I think will find elements of this interesting. If you find sort of the Nordic mythology interesting, I think you'll find some of this very interesting. But this is just a gem of a little sort of like mystery thriller movie that, again, I've heard nothing about. I've never heard anyone talk about it, watched it, and for what it was, I loved all of it. Something else I've been loving all of are all of my Universal Yums box. I get a new one from a different part of the world every single month, delivered to my doorstep, and they are packed with snacks. My last couple were from Egypt, the Philippines. I've got one from Russia that just arrived that I'm going to be opening up very soon. And I have been pairing them with movies from that part of the world as well. That's been kind of just a fun date night experience that me and my wife have been doing at night. You can follow the link in the description and choose from one of 3 different box sizes at 3 different price points and have your own Universal Yums night. The box not only contains unique snacks like chips and chocolates and cookies and cakes from all over the world, it also includes information about all this stuff, as well as little fun games and things that you can do as part of the overall experience. You can cancel your subscription at any time, but I have found it to be just a really fun break from the monotony of the pandemic. I've been able to experience some new things, even though I'm not able to get out and experience as much as I would like to. This has been a nice little break. I know a lot of you have been enjoying your Yums boxes as well. If you haven't signed up yet, again, just check out the link in the description below. Sign up, give it a try, see if it's something you want to keep rolling with month after month, but I have no plans to give mine up anytime soon. Now, my next pick is actually directed from the director of Pineapple Express. He was doing drama movies, sort of like art films before he got into some comedies, and he has circled back around. He most recently directed the Halloween reboot or sequel or whatever you want to call it. But Undertow is a very excellent thriller from 2004 that stars Jamie Bell. Now, this is when Jamie Bell was still a young man, and in this, he sort of just lives out in the woods, sort of almost off the grid, and then his uncle, his father's brother, comes knocking around looking for what may or may not be an existent family treasure. And it sets Jamie Bell's character off on this sort of adventure that you would not expect. Now, this is not a grand adventure. This movie is not Indiana Jones. This is very real, very grounded. It takes place in the South, and it's got sort of a grungy edge to it, but it also, again, feels very real. This is just sort of an art house film at times, while also having some really dark elements. This uncle character, played by Josh Lucas, is very sinister and very well portrayed. I loved what he did. I think this is one of his best roles of all time. It stands out to me a lot. If you typically like my recommendations, especially some of my thriller recommendations, movies like Green Room and Blue Ruin, while this isn't quite as hard-hitting, it still falls into that category, and I think it's just an excellent sort of underrated pick. Now, by far the lowest budget one I've got on this list, but also one of the most beautiful, stunning, sort of over-the-top visually, is Ink. Now, normally low budgets and big over-the-top visuals do not go hand in hand, but somehow Ink managed to pull off some really beautiful things with very little money. In addition to that, it's just a beautiful fantasy story that I think a lot of people will really enjoy. People who love movies like Labyrinth, I think, are really gonna dig Ink. There's dream sequences and nightmare creatures and a lot of heart to this one too. This one is gonna be a tearjerker for some folks. If you're, predisposed to cry in movies, this one might get you, but it's also just really stunning. Just a beautiful movie that is just amazing that more and more people have not found this movie over the years, because it does have some years on it now. But this movie and movies like it are why this channel exists. I love and live to recommend movies like this to people. My number 3 pick is directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, who's most famous for having directed Drive. And this is the movie he did right before Drive. It's also the first movie we ever saw a jacked Tom Hardy in. This is before he was Bane. And this movie is called Bronson. In this movie, Tom Hardy plays an infamous inmate from England who not only broke out, but just caused absolute chaos when he was in prison. And Tom Hardy, I think, delivers one of his best performances ever. He's gotten to where he plays these very, very quiet characters that don't speak much. Bronson is a very chatty, very odd prisoner that is not just a tough guy and a badass. He is almost a monster, but he's also the hero of the movie. He is the one that you're following and sort of rooting for. And Tom Hardy makes it work. Nicholas Winding Refn makes this story work. This one, again, is sort of an art house movie. It's got some really artsy shots in it, but it is more accessible. If you like Tom Hardy, if you like prison movies, if you like just sort of general like badass characters, this is definitely one to watch. My number 2 pick also features some very badass characters from a very badass director. This is director Joe Carnahan's first movie. It's called Narc. This got him all sorts of praise and really launched a career that brought us really badass movies like Smokin' Aces and The Grey. But Narc, I think, is one of the better cop films to have come out this century, and it only came out in 2002. One of the few cop movies I would put above it is Training Day, which came out only a year prior. Now this one features Jason Patric and Ray Liotta, and Ray Liotta is a total badass in this as well. But this is just a grungy drug cop movie with undercover work. There's a couple of beatdowns that occur in it. But if you like gritty cop dramas, this one is one of the best ever made. At least it's in the top 10. And it still is kind of a hidden gem because he was so unknown and it was such a small project when it was released. But just expertly delivered. I cannot recommend this movie enough for anyone that generally likes my recommendations. And then my number 1 pick would actually make a fantastic double feature with Ink. This is from the same director as Amelie, Delicatessen, which I've talked about recently on the channel. It's also available on Prime right now. But The City of Lost Children, I think, is easily his best film. This is French language with some English mixed in. There's a young redheaded Ron Perlman featured in this movie as well. But in addition to just a beautiful story, and it is a dark story, this is a rated R movie, this is definitely not for kids, but in addition to just being a good story, the visuals in this one are incredible. You're getting like touches of Tim Burton, but better in my opinion. Parts of this movie look a little bit like 12 Monkeys, but better again. It just looks amazing. And it's this great sort of delivery device for this beautiful but dark fantasy story. Top shelf pick for me. It's hard for me to come up with movies this good that I also consider to be lesser known and sort of hidden gem in nature. This one nails it. That's why it's my number 1 pick. Let me know in the comments below what movies you look forward to watching the most. Also, help me thank the Patreon supporters. They have been great supporters of the channel for so long. If you're interested in becoming one, there's a link to that in the description, as well as a link to become a channel member where you can get access to exclusive videos and movie reviews. But I will keep making videos like this one as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this episode, and you will see me on the next one.